Hi, and welcome to the Fancy Comma YouTube. Today I'm joined by Dr. Michael Demidenko, who is a staff research scientist at Stanford focused on computational neuroscience and quantitative methods. He received his PhD in psychology from the University of Michigan as a T32 fellow, followed by an F32 NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, postdoctoral fellowship at Stanford. His research spans behavioral survey and neural changes across development, with expertise in evaluating large-scale measurement and methodological issues. He has contributed to the ABCD study, the largest neuroimaging study in the US focusing on analyses and data integrity. His work includes creating tools for researchers and advancing efforts to democratize access, use, and reproducibility of large-scale secondary data in functional and magnetic resonance imaging. Welcome, Dr. Demidenko.
Thank you
Uh,
for having me.
it's great to chat with you. So tell us about what you do at Stanford and how you got into that work.
I've been at Stanford now for a little over 3 years. And the way I'd kind of break up my work or the efforts I've been focused on will kind of go into two branches, one being more focused on measurement and the other more on modeling and kind of like data integrity. But all of them kind of encompass the same thing. I predominantly focus on task functional magnetic resonance imaging. So that essentially is people that are engaging in some kind of game within a scanner, and we're measuring how their blood flow changes when they engage in one act in comparison to another. And these modeling approaches have been predominantly in the context of kind of developing brain. So here, defining development with the populations from ages 9 to about 24 have been the samples I've been focusing on. And so the first arm of my work over the course of the last 3 years is focused on kind of measurement, particularly related to kind of the most popular human incentive seance models or tasks that exist. And one being the monetary incentive delay test. So Brian Knudsen in early 2000s developed this task, has been around for 25 years almost, I'd say. And one fundamental question that we wanted to ask is there are theoretical frameworks that basically attempt to represent what is happening in the brain when people are engaged in the different phases or components of the task. So you can win $5, you can lose $5, and sometimes you get no money at all. And so you have behavioral responses that dictate whether you're successful in obtaining that $5 or keep the $5 so you don't lose it. And so given the theoretical frameworks, it's proposed that you have one part of the brain that's very much related to reward tracking or salience and the nucleus accumbens, as it's commonly referred. And then you have other regions which are more related to valence or how like arousing something is. And that could be tracking like the positive or negative, and that's in the insular cortex. And so in his popular framework, he kind of represented it as a circumplex model where you can distinguish across axes where these positive and negatives fall on. And so one of the measurement and theoretical components that we did was we basically combined 3 large data sets for functional magnetic resonance imaging that collected the same task. So this wasn't a task that, there was one version and a really different version in another set. We tried to basically get data sets that had the closest versions possible, which included the ABCD multi-site consortium study, as well as the Michigan longitudinal study, and my former advisor who collected adolescent brain data for his study as well. And so we were able to evaluate across 3 data sets of comparative design how well is this kind of theoretical framework represented. And so we found less evidence for it across the way we measured it and specified it, but there's obviously other work that needs to be done to continue of like distilling of why we didn't find it and which way it may be represented. And another element when it comes to measurement, we've been kind of focusing on the test-retest reliability. So how accurately, when we measure, say, someone's engagement in a task and how their brain is responding between these 2 different conditions, when we administer task once and we administer it the second time, how different or how consistent are your brain responses? And so we, in that project, wanted to basically evaluate, are there decisions that researchers are making across their analytic or pre-processing pipeline, meaning how I'm kind of cleaning data or preparing that signal that I'm going to analyze, if there are ways to improve our kind of reliability of this measurement. So the accuracy of that measurement. And this in part is because in, I think, 2020, Elliott and others came out basically doing a meta-analysis and a small sample analysis of test-retest reliability, showing that's really low. And really low for fMRI shouldn't be unexpected compared to, say self-report measures, because we're dealing with something very dynamic and complex as neural responses, especially when we look at BOLD. But in any event, we effectively were able to run this series of models, which were over 240, to compare and evaluate, are there things like controlling for different motion styles that will impact results, or there may be different smoothing, how much we smooth the signals. Because you know, as you can imagine, everyone's brain is not identical. So if we smooth more, maybe signal will begin to overlap, and so it'll be more reliable between people and across time. And so there we were able to, for the task, basically identify that, you know, you can improve forms of reliability through some decisions, but they don't always make sense. And so the question becomes is that the right decision, or how do you go about it? So in that paper, we made recommendations. And so kind of representing this issue and some ongoing future work that could be valuable. But then in the other facet, with respect to like modeling and data integrity, given that I've been working with large data sets, such as the ABC study, others, it's required me to go from end to end. So your raw imaging data to cleaning up, pre-processing, doing quality control analyses, et cetera. So all the way to the final stages of reporting. And so it kind of gave me a look into some issues that appear in large data sets. Having worked with the ABCD study, which has 10,000, 11,000 participants that are, you know, have data collected repeatedly, I think right now up to like 4 years, we're looking at only 2 years of time, but we found some issues in modeling decisions that kind of went unnoticed for quite some time. And so it really kind of made me curious and intrigued by this problem of having these secondary data sources and decisions that are made that are sometimes maybe decisions that we could disagree on fundamentally about what should be done, what shouldn't be done, because open science and neuroscience is an iterative process, and there's no one fact of how to do things. But that there are others that are more clear, like you know that is an error, whether it's a timing or pre-processing stuff. And so I've been able to work on these large consortium data sets, identifying problems and solutions that can be kind of released and distilled to the community, so we can have better and more reliable signal as far as like data cleaning and preparation. And then what related, we've also been, this is kind of a challenge that was introduced, or kind of something we wanted to address in the last 4 to 5 months as part of the OpenNeuro grant that Russ Poldrack has been leading for quite some time now. OpenNeuro has been around from 2016. And so on OpenNeuro, people are sharing and contributing either EEG, MEG, FNIRS, fMRI data, other functional, structural MRI. And so it's a great secondary data source. But sometimes just having the data isn't enough, because there is next stages that need to be done. You know, you have the raw data, but you need to transform the data to prepare it for analyses. And so when you have this impressive tool like OpenNeuro, it's really awesome for the community. But when you consider that not everyone in the community has access to maybe computational or coding skills, just because their team is not involved in it, their institute doesn't facilitate it, invest it as much, it really creates this barrier to entry, and it's not very democratic form of access. And so one of the things that Russ Poldrack and his team has been doing is, one, taking these raw functional MRI data sets, pre-processing so people don't have to do it on their own, and sharing them on another kind of AWS bucket where people can access it via OpenNeuro. The next step, and the hard step, getting these two data sources together, but then knowing how to prepare events files, behavioral files that people need to use and model to get these statistical maps that we often see with blues and reds in pictures on TV or journals or in conference presentations. And so that part is kind of hard. And one reason, and one primary reason, is every data set's different. People upload data sets in different styles and structures. While you can enforce standards, so some requirements, how files should be structured, you can't over enforce because then people won't upload it. So this is like this tug and pull of asking for enough, but not asking for too much where people won't do it. And so that kind of presents the opportunity of having a lot of data, but a problem and a challenge where it's not as easy to dynamically and quickly analyze it. And so we've been working on a tool combining OpenNeuro and FitLens, which is another analysis tool that is a wrapper for BidStats models, to kind of generate a workflow that takes advantage of downloading with a simple line, like in a bash terminal that requires no expertise really, to then kind of transforming using a set of Stanford standards, which people can do either if they know a little bit about Python, they can use the examples that are already there to kind of mimic for what they need for their data set. Or in modern day, the realistic thing is you use ChatGPT or Claude to kind of create a small little function using the format and example that we provide, I think 100 of them to that point. And so now you have basically transformations of data and cleaning of data and fitted models that you can quickly run and get your export analyses. And so instead of spending 2 months of formulating what needs to be done and going through each file, finding them, through 4 steps, you can basically have something done in about a day or 2. So it really kind of limits the amount of time people need to spend and effort required to achieve some task-based analyses with OpenNeuro secondary data. And we've kind of tried to illustrate through examples by analyzing over 50 data sets that exist on OpenNeuro or 100 tasks that exist on OpenNeuro. So basically, we've showed templates in varieties across motor, visual, auditory, kind of social process or reward process, working memory, a range of kind of cognitive concepts. And so we feel like this is the next opportunity to refine and improve to really maximize the use of these data. And so that's kind of like a coverage of these 2 pillars that I've been working on over the last 3 years, which encompass both measurement, but as well as this modeling and data integrity and kind of democratizing the access and usability of those data sets.
So, okay, I sort of was following you on this and sort of not. So you're saying like if there's 3 different researchers, they each did the same, I used to do financial decision making as well. So like the delay discounting fMRI task, like 3 of them did this task. You wanted to compare the task activations between the 3 data sets. Is that something you can do with what you're developing, which I guess is called OpenNeuro?
Yeah, so OpenNeuro is the website where the secondary data is. So if you went on openneuro.com and clicked on MRI datasets and searched for the delayed discounting, as you use an example, and say 3 researchers, separate researchers, uploaded files and data, you can use this 4 or 5-step tool to effectively do the same thing on each of those data sets, but from downloading, so getting it off Amazon Web Services, and then creating a simple like couple lines of code that allows you to get the behavioral data in similar structure and format, and then just run the same model, acknowledging that there might be, say, differences in how one group called something versus another, where some people might use an acronym, but others might use the full name, right? And so you can then formulate the same model and the same approach to all 3 data sets and just run them via 3 or 4 lines of kind of a bash code. FitLens, which is a wrapper of BidStats models, it'll give you the same type of outputs at a subject level and if you want a group level analysis. So that way it's always consistent and it's easy to identify where is output A, where is output B, and how is this labeled, because everything is kind of using the same format and structure.
So you can directly compare the results. So if the data researchers uploaded their paradigm and their data, you can compare those and see, can you compare and see if they have the same activations? Like, what do people usually use this tool for?
Yeah, so oftentimes folks that use OpenNeuro essentially want to ask a specific question. They could be a clinician, they can be a cognitive neuroscientist, they can be a data scientist or a machine learning engineer of any sort. So there's a span of research that use it. But say you are a person that wants to identify how people respond to faces, right? You have happy faces, you have sad faces, angry faces. You can go on OpenNeuro and find data sets that have facial components like that, and then download, say there's two, you download both of those. And if the data sets have the same kind of overlapping features in their paradigm, where you see happy faces and sad faces, you can run this workflow and compare the results between them very easily. So we don't facilitate the comparison side. We just facilitate the performing each sequence of steps that you can then use to compare however you intend to, given that the outputs and the style of outputs and structure will be the same. The only thing that will differ is maybe like how the output is referred to for, say, data set 15, which has one faces task, and data set 312, which has the other one, just because of how it's currently written in the code to output into these folders. So yeah, you can analyze a task if you're interested about a process to evaluate what regions in the brain are activated as a function of a cue type, a behavioral type, or something else that you might be interested across a range of domains. And then you also, if you can amass enough tasks that are shared on there, or you have your own data sets, you can just compare the results between activation that one data set gets another. And so it kind of goes into this territory of what kind of like mega analyses, what you can basically facilitate. So instead of going and getting coordinates from papers and comparing, you can do the same thing on each data set and compare them in full, which really opens things up.
Well, so that's really interesting to me because, like, I'm an independent neuroscientist. I left academia in 2013, but I have this vision of like doing a study, testing a hypothesis I have about post-traumatic stress disorder and the different brain regions. And I was like, well, I know how to program. There's all this open data available. Maybe I could just download some data sets and like I don't have to do the research. It's like so hard to get MRI data, like expensive, hard.
Mhm.
But you could just get this data if it's uploaded like fMRI paradigms and data from OpenNeuro and just do a study, it sounds like.
Yep, and that's basically what OpenNeuro facilitates. It's you register for account, and it will facilitate you to download and access the data because it's free to use. It has functional data, it has structural data, and it has the behavioral tasks if there's functional tasks associated with it. And you can run your analysis and ask your question, given that the data set for PTSD, for example, is uploaded. But currently they have, I think, 1,400 data sets that are uploaded. Of course, that spans a gamut of EEG, MEG, FNIRS, and other that wouldn't facilitate MRI, fMRI analysis. But the current format of OpenNeuro and what people have been uploading is predominantly MRI and fMRI, but it's been expanding in other domains as well. But yeah, you can ask whatever research question you essentially want. You don't have to be at an institute. You don't have to collect it, and you can just run the analyses.
I mean, that sounds amazing, except now it's you just posted on LinkedIn that you're being, I don't know what the correct term is, because I said fired to someone and they weren't really fired. They were terminated, and it wasn't like, it's like, what's the proper word to describe what's happening to your job with OpenNeuro and Dr. Poldrak?
OpenNeuro on its own is obviously continue on. It's a massive project that gets a lot of funding, and it's been funded for quite some time through multiple initiatives. It just, in my situation, the amount of money coming in basically shrinks. And so, as any business or any company, you have to basically identify where you can make cuts to retain kind of like your essential people. So if you think about OpenNeuro being a web source, it has a lot of data engineers, software engineers that are its backbone. So my position was, since I got most recently added to it, was the first one that was dissolved as a function of the budget cuts. So, I mean, fired, I guess, works, laid off works, or in my HR meeting, the email they call it, transition meeting. No longer employed at this place is the best way to phrase it.
I'm sorry to hear that because OpenNeuro sounds cool. You're like a PhD level scientist. I was just thinking about how much taxpayer money has probably like been invested into your career because you did your PhD at University of Michigan, which I assume was taxpayer funded, and then you did your postdoc and you got a grant. So that was an NIH grant. So can you estimate how much taxpayer funding has been put into you as a scientist, or do you have any idea of like an estimate?
Yeah, I mean, if I were estimating, so the hard part is some of these numbers universities inflate to make it sound bigger and better, and particularly the PhD level. And so I think PhD at University of Michigan, they would say that they invest about $300,000 into you. That includes tuition, it includes healthcare, it includes your kind of stipend that you get, in addition to funds you can apply for. I eventually got onto a fellowship, which paid for 3 years of my time there. And so that was paid through the National Institute of Health or Child Development as that fellowship was funded. And so the cost was less, it was split. So it's kind of better for the university. Then the grant that I got from NIDA, or National Institute of Drug Abuse, was roughly in the ballpark of 200,000 or 210,000 for 3 years. So that grant effectively paid for my salary, paid for my healthcare, and allowed me to do what I needed to do in my research. And then, and this last year, so the OpenNeuro grant is its own thing, and it gets to continue and live and exist and make awesome things and make people's lives better when it comes to neuroscience research. But I've been only funded by it for about a year. So if we say one was 300, another was 200, I think in total maybe $600,000 was invested in funding my time and my training. Not to mention the amount of time spent by others that either consulted or provided expertise to train me that weren't through coursework, for example. But a low ballpark would be probably $600,000 would probably spent on training and then salary, so to speak.
That's like over $500,000. $500,000 is $500,000, but that's a lot of money. Like, I mean, it's money well spent if you ask me. I felt really sad as you were adding that up because that's a lot of money. It's a lot of your time. I know that like my graduate training, I think I was in grad school for like 5 or 6 years, so that was like almost $200,000. It's really hard because it's not just you, it's also other postdocs and staff scientists and graduate students. I've heard a lot of people talk about the next generation of science being in peril because gotta gotta get them into the pipeline of science, and that takes a lot of time and takes a lot of money. We have no lack of scientific resources in the US, but now it's like science funding is, I want to say, under jeopardy right now. You work at Stanford. I think it's even worse at Harvard. I talked to a Harvard grad student, and she said that morale was very low in her department at Harvard about everything, and all the graduate students were trying to finish their projects and leave early. So, what was it like navigating your projects being terminated due to government funding cuts?
I feel as though um, there's going to be a lost generation when it comes to some academic research. Whether it's going to end up being good or bad, it's hard to say. I feel as though scientists and individuals are oftentimes resilient and they find other ways to make the science work. So whether that's getting industry involved or something other. So the nice thing about working with Russ Poldrack is he creates open source tools and open source packages, created OpenNeuro, Biz, fMRI Prep, so many other things. And he also is a person who's often pretty open about things. And so he kind of approached me early on once the concerns about funding from January 20th started. Within a couple of weeks, we had a meeting to discuss like what this may look like in the next year or so. We were working on another grant that we had submitted, which we were hopeful on, but didn't get funding, obviously, since I'm in this situation. But it was basically a scenario where I was told that if there's a big cut to the OpenNeuro grant, that he may not be able to support me moving forward at the end of my contract. And from a running a lab perspective, that made sense. And I appreciate that he was transparent to start. But it was kind of up until finding out the decision of what funding looks like, which took a while. And then it didn't help the indirect costs got cut. So Stanford lost, I think, like some 160 million. But you kind of went through the day-to-day of, focused on work, trying to do your best, make things that will improve science as best you can, because that's what I was committed to. But in the back of your head, you always are reminded like, oh, you might not be here in 3 months. You might not have a job. You might have to look for something else. And knowing that that may coincide with a lot of other people going through the same thing, given that funding is often renewed at the fiscal year, which is, during summer is a big grant time. So there's a lot of people that might be cut. So you will be on the job market like everyone else at the same time. And mentally that kind of hangs on you and beats you up. It's not a pleasant thing. I don't know if it would be better or worse how an industry you get an email and you're laid off by the next day. But in this scenario, you continually know that something's coming. You just don't know what or how bad it's going to be. When it came, when I kind of found out recently, it was tough because, I felt like this next step tool that I was working on that interface with OpenNeuro, it was working and it was working better than we had expected. And we made a lot of progress, and it seemed like there would be a lot of scientific opportunity for us to even try to do so many questions you can ask. And given that my involvement with it ended, it was kind of, disappointing, discouraging, because it was something that I worked on for 5 to 6 months and kind of spending time with myself, going back with colleagues and collaborators or people that are uploading these data to make sure, did we do it right? Are we representing your data correctly? Because one person can't know every model. So getting that feedback was important. And then having cultivated and put so much effort and realizing, well, it's not my thing anymore. Someone else is going to have to continue this on. I'm glad it will maybe live on through someone else's effort, but it's disappointing that I can't continue it. But it's that is the reality sometimes of soft money positions. And so that's what research scientists often are. You accept that reality when you accept those positions. It just so happens to be this year was probably the worst time to be in one of those positions. So being blunt, it sucks, but I guess it could be worse. There's many scenarios that are far worse, I could imagine. So I'm just gotta remain optimistic and hopeful that things will progress and get better, but try something different, I suppose.
That sounds really hard. And basically, everyone I've talked to that's been affected by the federal budget cuts has almost said the same thing, that like one person was like, this is the hardest time of my life. It was like an epidemiologist working for CDC, a contractor that got fired. So you said that your project might go on, but it sounds like there's a chance that it might not go on. So do you know if there's someone that will replace you or carry the flag, carry the torch, I guess?
Yeah, so that part I'm not quite sure. So OpenNeuro as a whole will continue on for probably many years to come at different funding capacities that they'll kind of encounter. Don't know how that will change. But the project that I was working on to kind of facilitate this task for my analyses, I'm not sure. It will obviously remain as a repository that people can use and add to. How much of it will be updated and refined as users start using it more, have requests for features or have requests for bug fixes, that I don't know. Obviously, I'd love to say that I enjoyed building the product for these task analyses and I'm proud of it and I'd love to maintain it moving forward. But it's one of those things where is that a practical thing to do on a hobby on a weekend when you have a 2-year-old? Maybe not, especially if you have another job. Maybe if I don't find a job in the course of the next 2 months, I'll keep playing around with it and making it better as people use it and get feedback. But I think it's unclear right now who will maintain it moving forward. I just know will exist as a repository and it's open and people can use it now. I'm trying to finalize some fixes through people kind of voluntarily going through a couple of analyses to give me some feedback as I've been doing over the last few months. And so it'll hopefully be a standalone product that people can use without much additional effort. But yeah, the other part of how it might be refined down the road, it kind of remains to be seen. I'm hopeful maybe someone will take it on. Their funding comes back in different ways. So maybe they'll get funding and get a postdoc or another staff member that'll show an interest that can pursue it.
That sounds really sad. It sounds like the way you've described it, it may not even continue, which is interesting given the Trump administration just released some guidelines on gold standard science. And I think one of them was like reproducibility. So it's like, I feel like this is a thing you can use to do reproducibility, like reproducing the results of a study, checking and seeing if different studies have the same results, which is also, I want to say, part of reproducibility, but maybe someone that's more well versed in this would argue with me. But I feel like people always argued with me in neuroscience, whether I was wrong or right. I've definitely done so much convincing of neuroscientists, but I
I think
really
people
feel like
just
it's,
argue in neuroscience.
they argue so much. The level of argument is like, wow. Is there any place that people can like donate to OpenNeuro if they really care about open neuroscience?
uh, I'm not really sure about donating to OpenNeuro. I know they're funded by the National Institute of Mental Health, and they're in year 3 of a 5-year grant. So I think the big donation would be people basically if they go on OpenNeuro and see the value of it is kind of encouraging people they know to maybe continue funding projects like that because I agree with you that OpenNeuro is a valuable thing for reproducibility. And it aligns with effectively the goal of data sharing that NIH instituted several years ago, where every grant that collects data has to make data accessible and openly available. And OpenNeuro so happens to be that tool for brain imaging. And so long term, it's going to be a valuable thing to maintain, expand, refine, and add other features to really facilitate these grand ideas that would allow for computational complexity and feasibility of like mega analyses that people want to do across all the realms of imaging, not just what I like, which is task for mine, because that's Russ's ultimate goal of combining OpenNeuro, bid stats models, and bid standards is to create a opportunity to easily and programmatically run models and extract information across vast amounts of data sets to get more precision about what we know, or at least get understanding of why things are variable and how, as opposed to just relying on things that are in kind of the papers or group statistical maps. So there's a lot of power in able to run and rerun things yourself in the same way as been shown repeatedly in the literature.
I often, when I read a study, I do want to like go and do their work, the research myself. So, okay. So how's Russ Poldrack doing amidst the defunding of his lab?
His lab is still reasonably funded. They've lost funding. They've had to prioritize projects. Obviously, from my understanding, it's tough for him. I could imagine as a person who, I mean, his job is being responsible for people's livelihoods, right? He has to pay for their healthcare, their salaries. Sometimes people have dependents that those salaries are funding and healthcare is providing. And so I'm sure this whole year some things have been keeping him up at night more than others. And once he gets bad news and he has to relay it, as he's kind of voiced to me, it's not a fun thing for him to do. It's a hard thing. He wishes he could keep people on that are contributing to this ecosystem of open and reproducible science, but he's just one person and he doesn't have millions of dollars he can just spend, so he has to be strategic when funding cuts happen. So I think that's kind of part of running a big group that does a lot of things is sometimes risks happen, and then you have to pivot in what way is possible to maintain the ultimate goal, which I think is to improve science.
Well, it's good that he's fine. I'm assuming these decisions are happening everywhere. I don't know about my alma maters of MIT and Georgetown. I used to work at Harvard Medical School as a research assistant, learning how to do actually MRI image processing, MRI, fMRI, EEG, and MEG. I don't know what they're doing right now. Do you know what it's like in neuroscience right now amidst the budget cuts?
I don't think it particularly hits neuro more than others. I think across the scope of institutes that rely on federal grants, it's tough only because I think R1s, which are mostly research and then teaching, R2s, which are kind of like a balance between the two, and then liberal arts, which are mostly education based, less research. I think maybe the issues of like COVID impacted the more education focus because now students are maybe not applying to go to college. And right now, I think we're going through the reverse where these institutes that are heavily funded by grants rely on indirect costs to maintain their imaging facilities that are massive and expensive, keep that staff on, and they lose $100 million in their budget. They have to figure out what to do. And so I think everyone's having to go through hardships, whether it's Stanford, Harvard, University of Michigan, University of Chicago's, NYU, etc. That I think everyone has to kind of strap down, buckle in, and figure out what's next and what the funding climate will look like. And based on that, kind of make decisions on hiring and investment. So I know colleagues from who were supposed to got a grant funded at a fundable score, but then they were told, we don't think we're going to fund this because there's just not enough money. And so we're going to just not. And so despite meeting the expectation and requirement, all of a sudden the target changed randomly on you, and what you thought was going to be a funded grant, and you're going to continue for the next 2 years, 5 years doing it. You now realize, I don't know if I'll be in my position in 6 months because now I'm waiting on this other renewal to come through. And if that gets cut, then there's no job and there's no more advancement of their science. And so
That
there have been
sounds
a number.
chaotic.
Yeah. It's a very stress filled, chaotic environment currently because there's no ability to predict. You can't predict what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and you don't know if it will stabilize. And so it's kind of, I think, using a scientific example and kind of like the animal literature where mice literature where rats are put in cages and the floor has some electricity, where at a certain point rats kind of give up when they don't have agency to get out of it. And I wonder for some people where they're kind of in the same position as that rat, where they keep getting shocked and they keep having the stress and they don't really see a clear way out except for just getting out of the cage, which in our circumstances, the ecosystem of academic research.
I've heard of the rats in the water maze and they eventually drown because they have learned helplessness because they just don't fight back anymore and they just kind of like give up.
Yeah.
Do you think that's what's happening to science right now?
I feel like I was going through that. There's like a certain level of helplessness, and you kind of just you keep trying to go, but then you kind of give up. And so that part of me searching for my next opportunity is kind of like, do I even want to do science anymore? I invested so much time, I invested so much effort doing it. It's not like I get paid a lot of money to do it. There are way more better paying jobs for the amount of time I spent in school. You keep sacrificing for it. You keep trying, but you never find that island because you're always working on the next thing. So it's like, is it worth it?
That's how it always has been. It's like the more work you do, the more work you get. Because you work hard, you get a grant, then you have all this work to do for like five
Yeah.
years. Then you still have to get more grants because it's like publish or perish. But now it's like everyone got all their grants. And by the way, it takes forever to get a grant and it takes so much work. And then some of them got their grants taken away. Other people are finding there's a limit on the amount of grants you can apply. I don't really know what to do with this other than be really grateful that I'm not a scientist right now because I left science in 2013. I don't even know what's going on. Like, I really wonder what's it like day to day working in a lab, like go in, read the news, see an executive order that affects you, hear about all your colleagues that are getting fired and their grants are defunded. That sounds incredibly demoralizing. That doesn't sound like a way to stay competitive in science in the US. I heard that a top Harvard mathematician is just going to China now. So that sounds really hard. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm talking to people that have been affected by this because I don't see this talked about in the news about how bad it is for our grants to be defunded. Like, you're an addiction researcher. I'm an addiction researcher. I don't want anyone to defund addiction research because I know so many people that have relatives that died of drug abuse or alcoholism, and just because you defund it doesn't mean the problem goes away. So, what's next for you? Like, you're clearly probably like many people wondering if this is all worth it anymore. What is next for you?
Um, Kind of trying to figure it out. I envy your decision of leaving science before this all started. Seems like a smart decision. I'm talking to some folks to figure out if there's a worthwhile opportunity to still stay in science and do similar work in just a different capacity with a different group, or just kind of rip the band-aid off and then go into an entirely new industry, whether it's healthcare, financial, tech. I feel as though there's a lot of valuable problems and there's a lot of solutions that can be provided in different companies, different sectors. So I've never really constrained myself to, I have to stay in science and do science. I enjoyed it and I liked investing and pursuing it in the enterprise itself. But right now, I don't really see the motivating factor for it because my passion for it started or to pursue it in 2007, and it's been 18 years, and now I'm realizing, oh, was that for nothing? And so the question becomes is, do I want to continue pursuing nothingness if it's so simple for someone to come in and basically create chaos? And so I'm not quite sure yet what's in it for me. I definitely know that it's a massive self-reflection of what I've done and decisions I made that led up to here. Some obviously I have no regrets. I've enjoyed the people I work with, the projects that I've got to be on, and the things that I've learned. It's been a privilege to do it at the place I've done it, but still requires some self-reflection for what I want my future to look like. And if I want to be stressed for a full year because I don't know if I'm going to have a job.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of different issues to, well, job transitions are always hard. When I left my graduate program, it was actually because I ran out of funding. So I didn't really have like a choice in it, but I did
Mhm.
apply to Georgetown so many times they just banned me because they were like, no, we're done. It's over. Stop chasing this. And so I was struggling so hard with leaving academia for so long, but now I don't feel like I'm glad that I was able to make that transition. But I also feel like science is important. And just because
Mhm.
the Trump administration is, for whatever reason, destroying the US science infrastructure, I can say after doing tons of interviews with people, like just completely traumatizing and torturing people in the science infrastructure and across other sectors of government. This interview series focuses mostly on science. I'm really concerned, honestly, and I don't think it's fair that people should have to make these decisions. Like, I know the economy's in a tough place, but I think that these actions are just making it worse. And like, I'm really bummed about this, that you're losing your role as an addiction scientist. There is an addiction science action network or something for addiction science researchers, and they're always writing op-eds and stuff, because addiction science is one of the more easily understandable sciences, I feel like, because everyone knows someone that has an addiction, and it's not like a really obscure thing in like quantum computing that many
Yeah.
people don't realize. Like I just learned about quantum computing the other day and it was really confusing. But I know about what addictions are. So, and I'm an addiction person as well. So I'm like so sad about this. But well, good luck figuring that out. Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and you sharing your insights and discussions you had for others across this kind of like a tumultuous time when it comes to science. But I remain optimistic about people's resilience and science continuing in whatever way. Like water, it'll find a way. Um,
I agree. And if anyone watching this is being affected by the federal actions and wants to be interviewed, definitely get in touch. You can contact me. Thanks for your time today, Dr. Demidenko. Good luck with whatever all you're doing right now and in the future.
yeah, for sure. Appreciate your time and inviting me to chat.